The Legend of Zelda: Link's Awakening has been released to the masses, giving fans a nostalgic overload 26 years in the making. So what does this remake do well, what can make it better, and what can this title potentially mean for future Zelda games? Well, before we get into all that, a little history. Released 2 years after 1991's A Link to the Past, Link's Awakening is the fourth game in the franchise and the first one to be portable. It was originally going to be a handheld adaptation of A Link to the Past, but over time enough ideas were added to make it its own game. Development of the title was much more laid back than your typical Zelda game. The first builds of the game were even created on just dev kits by Nintendo employees after hours, almost like an after-school program as one of them described. The project caught steam after A Link to the Past was completed, and much of that team came over to help out with Link's Awakening, releasing a year and a half later as the quirky title it remains today. The dev team had so much fun making this title that director Takashi Tezuka said he felt that they were making a parody of a Zelda game rather than an actual Zelda game, which makes sense. There's no Princess Zelda, there's no Triforce, and the game does not take place in Hyrule. And with a handful of cameos from the Mario and Kirby series, this definitely had a lot of experimental things going for it, and that nature is probably a reason why it's a lot of people's favorite game in the entire Zelda franchise. Now finally, fans get to enjoy a remake of this classic 26 years later. And how does this version hold up to the original? Well, first, let's talk about what this title does best, the presentation. A whole new style of Zelda has unfolded right before our eyes, having its own unique style while still screaming Zelda, which is just not an easy thing to do. Each model from trees to Link himself looks like he can be taken out of a toy box. It's just an extremely charming art style that works exquisitely well with the top-down Zelda game. The soundtrack is a completely remixed version of the original soundtrack. It sounds great and matches the aesthetic of the game perfectly. There are tons of callbacks to the original tracks hidden through all the sound design. Just another A+ Zelda soundtrack to add to the list. Naturally, there's a nice handful of quality of life improvements here, such as items having their one dedicated button, such as for running and for your shield. In the original, you had to switch out all these items since you only had the two buttons. Gameplay is classic top-down Zelda greatness, always satisfying, feels very much like the original, and it's just fun to go around and whack things and collect things. In fact, a lot of elements feel like the original. You could almost call this a shot-for-shot remake, with the world map and the dungeon layouts being nearly identical. Now, people can go either way on this, but personally I was hoping that there would be some more new elements introduced here. It didn't have to be anything huge, maybe just a new area to explore or a new dungeon to conquer, but they just decided to stick very true to the original. And while this complaint is really only reserved for old farts like me that have already played the game back in the day, it still would have been nice to see a bit more content added to this adventure. That being said, I was honestly surprised how well these 26-year-old dungeons stood the test of times in terms of level design. There's still head-scratching moments, and the puzzles have not lost their cleverness after all these years. The only other issue with staying this true to the original is the game's length. With this being based off a Game Boy game, it's obviously not the longest game in the world, and can be completed in under 15 hours, if not less, depending on how much you remember. Now, to add some more replay value, and easily the most exciting feature of this game was creating your own dungeons. I didn't know how much I would like this mode going into it, but I actually had a lot more fun arranging dungeons than I thought I would. Now, you're locked to using full rooms. I just wish that you could mix and match different elements like enemies or more specific items to a chest, making this mode feel a little bare bones, but it has an incredible amount of potential and hopefully leads to a Zelda Maker type game in the future. This art style would really fit well for a title of that nature, being all grid-based and whatnot. Unfortunately, there is just one glaring problem with this mode in that there is no online sharing your levels. Honestly, I just assumed that this would be there, but unfortunately the only way to share your dungeons is through amiibo figures. Now, I'm sure there's a valid reason for this, but it's still very disappointing to see something that could have given this game nearly endless replay value just not be present. This would have been an even better testing ground for this type of gameplay and online compatibility if Nintendo is really trying to test out the waters of a potential Zelda Maker game. And guys, I know it seems like I'm talking a lot of smack right now, but it's only because I love this game and I just want there to be more of it. And I think there's a couple more aspects that could have been added to really make this worth its $60 price tag. Like, for example, after the main story is complete, a master mode can be unlocked, similar to how Ocarina of Time had a master mode on its GameCube release, that would feature remixed dungeons and would also have the hero mode mechanics already present in the game. making that a much more difficult journey. This feature could also emphasize the dungeon making mechanic and give players examples on different and unique ways to use that mode. Just give dungeon sharing online support. I feel like if you can put the data on an amiibo, you should be able to upload it to the internet. And maybe add a 2-player versus mode similar to Zelda 4 Swords Adventures. It's unfortunate, because a lot of these problems could be nullified if the game was just cheaper. I mean, honestly, if this was a $40 game, I would have little to no criticism for this game, but it's $60, and as the game stands now, I just simply don't think it's worth that price. But as a huge Zelda fan, I still love this game, and I know every other Zelda fan will love this game. It presented us with a whole new style of Zelda, which is something you just don't get to see every day, and it still holds up today in its own right. The Zelda magic is certainly not lost with this title. And with how successful this game has been in the early going, I'm extremely excited to see what other games this style of Zelda will lead to.